The moment Bella stepped back from her own newborns and let out a low, trembling growl, Ethan Carter felt something cold crawl up his spine because in all his years around dogs, a mother had never feared her own litter. It was just past 2 a.m. in his quiet Ohio home, the kind of night where everything should have felt calm and routine, but nothing about this moment felt normal anymore. Bella had gone into labor an hour earlier, and Ethan had stayed right by her side, laying out clean towels, keeping the room warm at a steady 72 degrees, whispering soft reassurances as each tiny body entered the world. And at first, everything seemed exactly as expected, small fragile shapes no bigger than his palm, their faint movements and soft sounds filling the room with what should have been relief. But then Bella changed. Instead of licking them clean and pulling them close, she froze, her ears flattening against her head, her breathing turning shallow, her eyes locked on the litter as if she didn't recognize what she was seeing. And then she stepped back, just one slow step, followed by that low warning sound. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakably wrong. Ethan blinked, trying to make sense of it, telling himself this had to be stress, maybe confusion, maybe exhaustion, because Bella was the gentlest dog he had ever known, the kind that would nuzzle children and curl up quietly beside him on long evenings, never once showing even the slightest hint of fear. Yet now she wouldn't go near her own puppies. He leaned forward carefully, his heart starting to beat faster. And that's when he noticed it, something small, something subtle, something he couldn't immediately explain, because the shapes in front of him didn't look quite right. Not exactly. Not in a way he could easily describe, but enough to make his stomach tighten. Their movements were just slightly off, their tiny bodies shifting in a way that felt unfamiliar. And one of them let out a faint sound that didn't match the soft whimpers he had expected. "It's okay, girl," he whispered, more to himself than to Bella. But she didn't relax, she didn't move closer. Instead, she let out another low growl, her body tense, her gaze fixed, almost like she was trying to warn him. And that was the moment the unease truly settled in, because this wasn't confusion anymore. This was fear. Ethan swallowed hard, glancing between Bella and the litter, his mind racing through every logical explanation he could find. Maybe it was a birth complication, maybe something was wrong physically, something a veterinarian could explain in seconds, because there had to be an explanation. There always was. But the longer he stared, the more that quiet sense of wrongness grew, pressing in around him, making the room feel smaller, heavier, as if something unseen had shifted the rules of what he thought he understood. Bella took another step back, her eyes never leaving the newborns, and for the first time, Ethan hesitated before reaching out, his hand hovering midair, caught between instinct and doubt, because deep down, a question had already begun to form, one he didn't want to ask, one he wasn't ready to face. But it was there all the same, steady and persistent, echoing louder with every passing second. What if Bella wasn't rejecting them? What if she was trying to tell him something was very, very wrong? Ethan slowly pulled his hand back, his breath catching in his chest as Bella's warning growl lingered in the air, low and steady, not loud but firm enough to stop him completely. And that hesitation, that single moment of doubt, was something he had never felt around her before, because Bella had always trusted him, always leaned into his presence. Yet now she was drawing a line he did not understand, and the more he looked at her, the clearer it became that this was not panic, this was intention. She was choosing distance, choosing to stay away from the tiny bodies on the blanket, and more importantly, she was trying to keep him away too. He shifted his weight slightly, forcing himself to stay calm, telling himself there had to be a simple explanation, something physical, something routine, because animals could act unpredictably after birth. He had read that before. Hormones, stress, exhaustion, all of it could affect behavior. And maybe that was all this was. Maybe he was overthinking it. But then one of the newborns moved again, a small, subtle motion, and Ethan felt that same unease tighten in his chest, because the movement did not look like the soft, clumsy wriggle he had expected. It was sharper somehow, more deliberate, and he found himself leaning forward again despite Bella's warning, trying to get a clearer look without stepping too close. The room felt quieter now, almost unnaturally still, the ticking clock on the wall suddenly louder than before, each second stretching longer, heavier, and Ethan realized he had been holding his breath, waiting for something to make sense, waiting for something familiar to anchor him. But nothing came, only more small details that did not quite fit, the way one of them shifted its head earlier than it should have, the faint sound that did not match what he had heard in other litters, and the way Bella's eyes tracked every single movement with intense focus, not with warmth, not with recognition, but with something closer to caution. He ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts beginning to spiral, because the longer he stayed in this moment, the harder it became to ignore the growing possibility that this was not something he could handle on his own, and that realization pushed him toward the only logical next step. He needed a professional, someone who could look at this and tell him he was imagining things, someone who could explain it in clear, simple terms and make this feeling go away. "It is okay," he said quietly, though his voice sounded thinner than he intended, as he reached for his phone on the nearby table, keeping his movements slow, careful not to startle Bella further, and she watched him closely, her body still tense. But she did not move. She did not approach the litter, and that absence of instinct, that refusal to return to them, only deepened the knot forming in his chest. He dialed the number he knew by heart, the local veterinary clinic just 15 minutes away, silently hoping someone would answer at this hour, because waiting until morning suddenly felt impossible. And as the line rang, he glanced back at the blanket again, his eyes narrowing slightly as he noticed another detail he had missed before, something small but undeniable, something that made his grip tighten around the phone, because no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, no matter how many explanations he ran through in his mind, one thought kept pushing its way forward, louder now, more insistent than before. This was not just unusual. This was something else entirely, and whatever it was, Bella had sensed it long before he did. The ringing on the other end of the line felt louder than it should have, each tone stretching across the quiet room as Ethan waited, his eyes still locked on the blanket, still searching for something familiar that would ground him. But instead, the longer he looked, the more details began to surface, small things he might have ignored under normal circumstances, now impossible to overlook, because one of the newborns shifted again, not with the slow, uncoordinated movement he expected, but with a slight lift of its head that seemed too early, too aware, and Ethan felt his pulse quicken as he leaned just a little closer, careful not to cross the invisible boundary Bella had set, his breath shallow, his mind trying to keep pace with what he was seeing. "Come on, pick up," he muttered under his breath, the phone still pressed to his ear, and just as the thought began to turn into frustration, a voice finally answered, calm and steady, cutting through the tension, and Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, quickly explaining the situation in as much detail as he could manage, his words coming faster than usual, tripping over each other as he described Bella's behavior, the strange movements, the sounds that did not quite match what he expected. And on the other end, there was a brief pause, not long, but long enough to make Ethan's stomach tighten again. The voice responded with measured concern, asking a few questions, simple ones at first, about timing, about Bella's condition, about how many newborns there were, and Ethan answered each one carefully, glancing back at the blanket after every sentence, as if afraid something else might change while he was not looking. And then came the suggestion he both expected and feared: bring them in as soon as possible, no delays, no waiting until morning. He swallowed, nodding instinctively even though the person on the other end could not see him, and agreed, ending the call with a quiet thank you before lowering the phone slowly, his hand lingering for a moment as if he needed the reassurance that help was on the way. The decision should have made him feel better, but it did not, because now there was movement again, more noticeable this time. One of the newborns shifting its body in a way that seemed too controlled, too precise, and Ethan felt that same chill return, stronger now, more insistent, as if something deep in his instincts was trying to catch up with what his eyes were already seeing. Bella let out another low sound, softer this time, but no less tense, her body angled protectively toward Ethan rather than the litter, and that detail, more than anything else, made him pause, because it was not rejection he was witnessing, it was positioning. She was placing herself between him and them, not out of confusion, not out of fear alone, but out of something that felt deliberate, calculated in a way that did not match anything he had ever known about her behavior. "It is okay," he said again, though this time the words felt hollow, lacking the confidence they once carried. And he slowly stood, forcing himself to focus on the next steps, gathering a clean towel, preparing a small crate for transport, his movements careful and measured, yet every action felt heavier, as if the room itself had shifted around him, pressing in closer with every passing second. He glanced once more at the blanket, his eyes narrowing as he noticed something new, something subtle but undeniable, a faint difference in the way their tiny bodies responded to the light. And that was the moment his hesitation turned into urgency, because whatever this was, whatever explanation waited at the end of this night, it was not something he could solve here, not alone. And as he reached for the crate, Bella's gaze followed him, unblinking, her tension unwavering, as if she already understood something he was only beginning to realize. Ethan hesitated for just a second before moving closer with the crate, his instincts pulling him in two different directions, one telling him to act quickly and follow the veterinarian's advice, the other urging him to stop, to wait, to listen to Bella's warning. But urgency won, or at least it seemed to, and he knelt carefully beside the blanket, keeping his movements slow, controlled, trying not to startle her further. Yet the moment he leaned in, Bella shifted sharply, stepping forward this time instead of back, placing herself directly between him and the newborns, her body tense, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity he had never seen before, and that single movement made his hand freeze midair. "Bella, it is okay," he said softly, his voice steady but uncertain, as if saying it enough times might make it true. But she did not relax, she did not soften. Instead she held her ground, her low warning sound returning, not louder, but firmer, more deliberate, and Ethan felt a flicker of frustration mixed with his growing unease, because this was not how this was supposed to go. He was trying to help, trying to do the right thing, yet somehow it felt like he was making it worse. He shifted slightly, attempting to reach around her without pushing too far, and for a brief moment, Bella allowed it, stepping just enough to the side for him to see the blanket again. And that was when another detail became impossible to ignore, because one of the newborns had moved closer to the edge of the towel, not in a random drift, but in a slow, steady motion that felt almost intentional, and Ethan's breath caught as he watched it, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew should be happening. Newborn puppies were not supposed to move like that, not this soon, not with that level of coordination, and the more he watched, the clearer it became that this was not a trick of the light, not a misinterpretation. It was real, and it was happening right in front of him. Bella noticed it too, her body tightening further, her attention snapping back to the litter as she let out another low sound, one that felt less like fear now and more like a warning. And that shift changed something inside Ethan, because suddenly he was not just confused, he was unsure of his own next move. The crate sat open beside him, ready, the plan simple and logical: gather them, get in the car, drive the 15 minutes to the clinic, let someone else take over. But logic was starting to lose its grip, replaced by a growing sense that he was missing something important, something Bella had already understood. He swallowed hard, his hand lowering slowly instead of reaching forward. And for the first time since the night began, he stopped trying to act and simply watched, really watched, forcing himself to take in every detail without rushing to explain it away. And as he did, another subtle difference revealed itself, something in the way their tiny forms responded to Bella's presence, not reaching toward her for warmth the way he expected, but reacting in a way that felt distant, disconnected, and that realization sent a quiet chill through him. "This does not make sense," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else, and Bella's ears flicked at the sound, her gaze briefly meeting his before returning to the litter, as if silently insisting that he pay attention, that he stop and see what she was trying to show him. The room felt smaller now, heavier, every second stretching longer as uncertainty pressed in from all sides, and Ethan found himself caught between two choices: follow the plan he had already set in motion, or trust the instinct he did not fully understand. And as he sat there, the weight of that decision settled deeper, because whatever was happening in front of him was no longer just unusual. It was something he could not ignore, something that demanded more than a quick solution, and Bella, standing firm and unyielding, seemed determined to make sure he realized that before it was too late. Ethan remained still for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the blanket as if forcing himself to finally see what had been right in front of him all along. And the longer he resisted the urge to act, the more details began to fall into place, small inconsistencies that now felt impossible to ignore, because one of the newborns shifted again, not toward Bella, not toward warmth, but slightly away, as if responding to something else entirely. And that subtle difference made his chest tighten as he slowly leaned back instead of forward, his instincts beginning to shift, no longer pushing him to intervene immediately, but urging him to observe, to understand before making a move he might regret. Bella seemed to notice the change in him, her posture easing just slightly, though the tension in her body never fully disappeared, her gaze still locked on the litter with unwavering focus, as if she was waiting for him to catch up, waiting for him to see the same thing she already had. And for the first time since the night began, Ethan felt a flicker of trust return between them, fragile but real, built not on control, but on attention. He swallowed hard, his mind replaying everything from the past hour, every movement, every sound, every reaction Bella had shown. And when he pieced it together, the pattern felt undeniable. She had not been confused. She had not been overwhelmed. She had been cautious from the very beginning, her behavior consistent, deliberate, and that realization sent a quiet wave of unease through him. Because if Bella was not reacting out of stress, then she was reacting to something real. Another small movement caught his eye, and this time he did not miss it. One of the tiny bodies shifted its head again, slightly higher than before, and for a brief second, Ethan thought he saw its eyes part just enough to catch the light, far earlier than he knew should be possible, and his breath slowed as he stared, his mind struggling to keep pace with what he was witnessing, because everything about this moment was pushing against what he believed to be true. "That is not possible," he whispered, though the words felt weak against the growing certainty forming in his chest. And as if in response, Bella let out a softer sound, no longer a warning, but something closer to insistence, urging him to pay attention, to stop dismissing what was right in front of him. The crate beside him suddenly felt unnecessary, almost out of place, as if it belonged to a different situation. Entirely, one where things made sense, one where actions followed clear expectations. But this was no longer that kind of situation, and Ethan realized that rushing to the clinic without understanding what he was dealing with might not be the solution he had thought it was. He ran a hand slowly over his face, trying to steady himself, trying to hold on to logic while everything around him seemed to be slipping just out of reach. And then another detail surfaced, one that made him pause completely, because the faint sounds coming from the blanket were not consistent, not uniform the way he expected. Instead, they varied in a way that felt structured, almost patterned, and that was when the unease shifted into something deeper, something heavier, because this was no longer just about appearance or movement. It was about behavior, about responses that did not align with what he understood. Bella remained where she was, steady and watchful, her presence no longer just protective, but guiding in a way that Ethan could not ignore. And as the seconds stretched on, he felt the weight of a realization settle over him, quiet but undeniable, that whatever these newborns were, whatever explanation waited beyond this moment, it was not something simple, not something he could dismiss or rush past, and Bella, standing firm between him and the unknown, had been trying to show him that from the very beginning. Ethan felt it before he fully understood it, a shift in the room so subtle, yet so undeniable that it made his thoughts slow down, as if something deeper than logic had finally caught up with what his eyes had been trying to tell him all along. And he found himself leaning back slightly, not out of fear, but out of a growing awareness that rushing forward might break something important, something Bella had been trying to protect from the very beginning. The faint sounds from the blanket continued, uneven, almost rhythmic in a way that did not match the fragile, scattered noises he expected from newborn puppies. And as he listened more carefully, he realized they were not random at all. They were responses, small reactions to light, to movement, to presence, and that realization made his chest tighten as he glanced at Bella again, her posture steady now, no longer retreating, no longer warning in the same sharp way, but holding her ground with a quiet certainty that felt almost deliberate. She was not afraid of them in the way he had first assumed. She was alert, watchful, as if she understood something he was only beginning to grasp, and that shift changed everything. Ethan slowly reached for his phone again, his fingers moving with more control this time. Less panic, more purpose, and he scrolled quickly before pressing the number once more, needing clarity, needing confirmation, because whatever was happening here was no longer something he could dismiss as unusual behavior or simple complications. It had crossed into something else entirely. The line connected, and when Dr. Melissa Grant answered, her voice calm but attentive, Ethan spoke more carefully this time, describing what he was seeing with greater precision, not just the appearance, but the movements, the timing, the reactions that did not align with what he had expected. And on the other end, there was silence again, longer this time, heavier, the kind of silence that carried weight. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted, no longer just concerned, but focused, analytical in a way that made Ethan stand a little straighter without realizing it. She asked him to describe specific details, the shape of their heads, the way they moved, how quickly they responded to touch or light, and Ethan answered each question slowly, carefully, glancing back at the blanket after every word, as if afraid the situation might change while he was not looking. Bella remained still, her eyes tracking every movement, every sound, her presence anchoring him in a way he had not expected, and for the first time, Ethan realized he was not alone in this, that Bella had been guiding him all along, not away from the situation, but deeper into understanding it. Another pause followed his final answer, and this time, when Dr. Melissa spoke, there was no hesitation in her voice, only a quiet certainty that sent a chill through him. "Ethan," she said slowly, "what you are describing does not match normal canine development." The words settled heavily in the air, simple yet impossible to ignore, and before he could respond, she continued, her tone steady but urgent, asking him not to move them yet, not to disturb anything, to observe, to keep Bella calm, because whatever was happening might require more than a routine visit. Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze returning to the blanket as the weight of her words fully registered, and in that moment, the last piece of doubt faded, replaced by a clear, undeniable truth that echoed through his mind. This was not normal, not even close, and Bella had known it long before he did. Ethan lowered the phone slowly, his hand lingering in midair for a moment as if the weight of what he had just heard needed time to settle into something real, something he could fully understand. But the words echoed clearly in his mind, steady and unshakable. This was not normal, and as that realization took hold, everything around him seemed to shift, not physically, but in meaning, in significance. Because the details he had been trying to rationalize were no longer isolated, they were connected, forming a pattern he could no longer ignore. He turned his attention back to the blanket, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if any sudden action might disrupt something fragile, something he did not yet fully grasp. And as he watched, one of the tiny forms moved again, lifting its head slightly, more controlled this time, more precise, and for a brief second, Ethan felt his breath catch as he noticed something else, something he had not been ready to see before. The way its eyes seemed to open just enough to reflect the dim light in the room, far too early, far too aware, and that single moment sent a quiet shock through him, not sharp or explosive, but deep and steady, like a truth settling into place. Bella shifted beside him, her posture no longer tense in the same defensive way, but firm, grounded, as if she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to finally understand. And when his gaze met hers, there was something different there, something that felt almost like recognition, not of the situation itself, but of the shared awareness between them, a silent acknowledgement that they were both seeing the same thing now. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand across his face as his thoughts struggled to catch up, because this was not just about something being wrong. It was about something being fundamentally different, something that did not fit into the simple explanations he had been clinging to. And that realization brought with it a mix of emotions he could not easily separate: confusion, concern, and a growing sense of responsibility that pressed heavier with each passing second. Another faint sound came from the blanket, and this time Ethan did not flinch. He listened, really listened, and the pattern was clearer now, not random, not scattered, but responsive in a way that suggested awareness. Even at this early stage, and that detail alone was enough to shift his perspective completely, because whatever these newborns were, they were not behaving like anything he had encountered before. He glanced briefly at the crate beside him, still open, still waiting, but it no longer felt like the right answer. Not yet, not without understanding more, and that hesitation, that pause, was something he would not have allowed himself earlier, but now it felt necessary, even important. Bella remained steady, her presence no longer just protective, but guiding, her gaze moving between Ethan and the litter as if ensuring he stayed focused, ensuring he did not rush past what mattered. And for the first time since the night began, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity begin to form beneath the uncertainty, not clarity of answers, but clarity of direction, because this was no longer about reacting quickly. It was about paying attention, about understanding before acting, about trusting the instinct that had been there from the start, even if he had not recognized it at first. He took a slow breath, steadying himself as he leaned back slightly, giving Bella space, giving the situation room to unfold, and as the seconds passed, the weight of what he was witnessing settled deeper, not as panic, but as realization, quiet and undeniable, that this moment, this night, was not going to follow any expectation he had ever known, and whatever came next would change the way he understood everything that had happened so far. Ethan stayed where he was, his breathing slow and controlled now, his eyes no longer searching for explanations but absorbing what was unfolding in front of him, and the shift in his mindset made every detail sharper, clearer, impossible to dismiss, because as the seconds passed, the subtle differences he had noticed before began to connect into something far more defined, something that felt intentional rather than accidental. One of the tiny bodies moved again, lifting slightly, and this time Ethan saw it clearly, not just the motion, but the response that followed, a faint adjustment as if reacting to Bella's presence, not instinctively reaching for warmth, but acknowledging it in a way that felt measured, and that single moment sent a quiet wave of realization through him, deeper than anything he had felt before. Bella lowered herself slightly, her posture shifting from rigid tension to a more grounded stance, still alert, but no longer resisting in the same way, and Ethan noticed that she was not retreating from the litter, she was observing it, carefully, deliberately, as if she was assessing rather than rejecting, and that distinction changed everything. He leaned back just a little more, giving her space, and as he did, Bella moved forward for the first time since the birth, slow and cautious, her nose lowering toward the blanket, her movements controlled, deliberate, and Ethan held his breath without realizing it, because this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that would confirm whether her behavior had been fear or something else entirely. She did not pull away, she did not growl, instead she hovered just above them, her focus intense, her breathing steady, and then one of the newborns responded again, shifting slightly toward her presence, not clumsily, not blindly, but with a subtle precision that made Ethan's chest tighten as he watched. It was not the reaction of something unaware, it was something else, something that suggested connection, awareness, and that realization settled heavily in his mind, reshaping everything he thought he understood about the situation. Bella let out a soft sound, no longer a warning, no longer defensive, but something quieter, something almost acknowledging, and for the first time since the night began, she did not step back. She remained there, close, present, as if she had reached a decision, as if she had moved from uncertainty into recognition. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering as a new emotion began to surface beneath the confusion, not relief exactly, but something close to understanding, because the fear that had filled the room earlier was no longer the same. It had transformed into something more complex, something that required patience rather than reaction. He glanced briefly at his phone, remembering Dr. Melissa's instructions, to observe, to avoid interference, and now those words carried more weight than before, because interfering too soon might have disrupted this exact moment, this fragile shift from distance to engagement. Another small movement drew his attention back, and this time, he noticed something even more subtle, the way their responses were not identical, each one slightly different, slightly distinct, and that detail deepened the realization forming in his mind, because it suggested individuality, not uniformity, something far beyond what he had expected. Bella remained steady, her presence no longer blocking him, but anchoring the moment, guiding it forward in a way that felt natural, almost instinctive. And Ethan understood now that what he had mistaken for fear at the beginning had been caution, not rejection, but awareness of something unfamiliar, something that required time to understand. The room felt different now, not lighter, but clearer, as if the uncertainty had shifted into something more defined. And as Ethan watched Bella remain close to the litter, no longer retreating, he realized that whatever these newborns were, whatever explanation would eventually come, they were not something to be rushed away from. They were something to be understood, and Bella had known that from the very first moment. Ethan remained still as Bella finally lowered herself beside the blanket, not retreating anymore, not warning him away, but settling into a quiet, steady presence that felt grounded and certain. And as he watched her carefully, he realized this was the moment everything shifted, not with a sudden reveal, not with something loud or dramatic, but with something far more powerful, a quiet understanding unfolding right in front of him. Bella gently moved closer, her nose hovering just above the tiny forms, her breathing slow and even. And for the first time since the night began, she did something Ethan had been waiting to see. She stayed. She did not pull back. She did not growl. She simply observed. And then, with a careful, deliberate motion, she lowered her head just enough to make contact. A soft nudge, cautious but intentional. And the response that followed made Ethan's chest tighten in a way he could not ignore. One of the newborns shifted again, but this time the movement was different, not distant, not disconnected, but aligning with her presence, subtle but undeniable. And that small interaction changed everything, because it was no longer about whether they were normal or not. It was about connection, about recognition forming in real time. Bella let out a soft sound, almost like a quiet exhale, and her body relaxed just enough to show that whatever uncertainty she had felt before was beginning to fade, replaced by something steadier, something instinctive. And Ethan felt a wave of emotion rise unexpectedly. Not fear, not confusion, but something deeper, something that came from realizing how close he had been to misreading the entire situation. He had been ready to separate them, ready to act quickly without understanding, and now, watching Bella carefully adjust, carefully accept, he felt that decision dissolve into something he could no longer justify, because she had not been rejecting them. She had been evaluating, learning, processing something unfamiliar in the only way she could. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering as the tension that had filled the room earlier shifted into something quieter, something more reflective, and for the first time since the night began, he allowed himself to sit back fully, to trust what he was seeing instead of trying to control it. The faint sounds from the blanket continued, still uneven, still different, but no longer unsettling in the same way, because now they carried context, they carried meaning, and as Bella remained close, her presence steady and calm, those differences felt less like a threat and more like something unknown that simply required time. Ethan glanced briefly at his phone, remembering Dr. Melissa's words, to observe, to wait, to avoid interference, and now those instructions felt more important than ever, not because something was wrong, but because something was unfolding that could not be rushed or forced into explanation too soon. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to see more clearly without intruding, and as he did, he noticed something he had not fully appreciated before. The way Bella's entire posture had shifted, not tense, not guarded, but attentive, engaged, and that change spoke louder than anything else, because it confirmed what he had only begun to understand, that her initial reaction had not been fear of her own offspring, but awareness of something different, something that needed to be understood, before it could be accepted.